Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. Headline today is California to COVID. Be less racist. Here is from Bill Malugin of Fox LA. Today, California's new COVID-19 health equity metric takes effect, mandating that counties must demonstrate that they are, quote, eliminating disparities and levels of transmission, unquote, amongst minority and poor communities, or they will not be allowed to reopen any further. And here is from the blueprint, the equity focus. This is dated September the 30th. It has been clearly documented that certain communities, low income, Black, Latino, Pacific Islander, and essential workers have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 in terms of higher rates of infection, hospitalizations, and deaths. These disparities create a public health imperative to address exposure in all communities, especially those disproportionately impacted, as a measure to protect all communities. The blueprint for a safer economy relies on two measures, case rate and test positivity, to determine when a county can move to a less restrictive tier with more sector openings and resultant increased interaction among residents. In order to avoid a surge of infections, the level of baseline infection in a community should be progressively lower as there is more movement and mixing. Most counties have significant differences in test positivity among more and less advantaged neighborhoods, with these differences often also overlapping with race and likelihood of employment as essential workers. Especially as counties grow into less restrictive tiers with more movement, the importance of this differential prevalence of infection grows because mixing and opportunities for transmission increase. Therefore, it is imperative to reduce disease transmission in all communities to ensure California reopens its economy safely. In order to advance to the less restrictive tier, depending on its size, a county will need to meet an equity metric and to demonstrate targeted investments to eliminate disparities in levels of transmission. For a county with a population of greater than 106,000, the county must ensure that the test positivity rates in its most disadvantaged neighborhoods, as defined as being in the lowest quartile of the Healthy Places Index census tracts, do not significantly lag behind its overall county test positivity rate, as described in detail below. The state will incorporate California Healthy Places Index into its decision-making for county reopenings. The HPI measures numerous things, including two-parent households, voting, alcohol availability, retail density, clean air and water, and tree canopy. A glimpse into our future, writes This Way 100, where governments will attempt to legislate outcomes that can't in reality be brought about through political will. California has been, the joke about California going back to the 1960s or even the 1950s, that it was the land of fruits and nuts, that it was crazy. But if you want to go back a couple of generations, this craziness was very appealing to the rest of America. Not so much now. California has, I believe, the highest rate of inequality in all of the 50 states. It might have something to do with importing millions upon millions of people with low IQ and little education and clamoring for more. So how is California going to meet this Procrustean standard? Could it perhaps deliberately infect white people, better off white people? That would be one solution, I suppose. It's rather similar to the orders that have come out about disciplining Black girls and boys in schools. That it just seems that too many Black boys and Black girls are being disciplined. And, well, there's two ways to deal with this. One, you can simply eliminate discipline, or two, you can make an effort to deliberately seek out white or other non-black students in order to punish. But just to give you an idea of, just how completely crazy California is, here's a message from the Office of the Governor of California from October the 3rd. Going out to eat with members of your household this weekend? Don't forget to keep your mask on in between bites. Do your part to keep those around you healthy. Hashtag slow the spread. And there is a picture of a woman at a restaurant, a woman, how should we say, indeterminate race. She's looking at the menu and her mask is on. Then she is eating and the mask is off. And then she is holding up a napkin and the mask is on again. Is it going to be like this and this and this and this? Sounds like a lot of fun. Does it not? Are you not amused? I just don't know how, well, here's the question. California seems to be slipping from the realm of devolving, if you will, from the realm of civilization to the realm of, well, the third world. How long will it be before we can look at the state of California as third world? San Francisco seems to have reached that state already, and many parts of Los Angeles appear to have reached that rate. Much of what would you call suburban Los Angeles appears to have become Aztec in its political habits. And of course, we're going to see more of that. But we hear a lot about conspiracies these days. And a conspiracy is anything which is not part of the dominant narrative. And Canada, of course, is not immune to these conspiracies. This is from the National Observer. Fight COVID-19 conspiracies with science literacy, Canada's top scientist says. And we are introduced to Canada's top scientist, whose name is Mona Nemer. She is Canada's top scientist. How exactly? She's a Nobel Prize winner. Does she have all these accolades? No, she is Canada's chief science advisor. That is to say that she is Canada's chief science bureaucrat. The story begins, U.S. President Donald Trump spent the spring promoting one baseless COVID-19 theory after another, from highlighting unproven anti-malarial drugs to suggesting unsafe behavior like injecting disinfectant or irradiating bodies with ultraviolet light. Well, that's not exactly what he said, but never mind that. The proliferation of these kinds of miracle cures or conspiracy theories about the novel coronavirus is presenting a health hazard to Canadians, Canada's chief science advisor is warning. This is something that is not just theoretically damaging, but can actually damage your well-being. So I'm concerned about this, and there's not an easy solution, said Mona Nemer. What I see out of all this is a more urgent need to increase science literacy among the public, and then the public will understand what's happening and provide the proper pressure on politicians for the proper use of scientific knowledge and evidence-based decision-making. It's the politicians who are supposed to make the decisions. That is what they are elected for. But instead, they have largely surrendered this to the latrine wallas, the public health bureaucrats. And again, there's certain things that one cannot say about a COVID-19. One will have one's comments first labeled, explained, and then removed from social media. Let's see, Nemer says she has been dismayed at the way that misinformation has crept into the public discourse about COVID-19, exploiting cracks in knowledge or communication failures. This is a very sinister sentence because what it's implying is that the government should have a monopoly here. It's a societal problem, and we each have a role to play in it. You don't have a role to play in it if you dispute the assertion that social distancing and mask wearing must go on forever, or else we're all going to die. Media have important roles to play, and scientists have important roles to play because they need to be present. They need to reach out, but they need to reach out in different ways from the ways that they've done it over the years. Again, that sounds quite sinister to me. What are the different ways? How much more power are we going to give the scientists? One example is how Chief Public Officer Dr. Theresa Tam's advice changed this spring on wearing non-medical masks. At first, the evidence available was that homemade masks were primarily useful in protecting others. But as more evidence was collected, studies demonstrated the role of masks in asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic transmission and how they offered a layer of protection. Really? Why don't you cite some of these studies? Because there is absolutely no consensus on this. These moments when scientific advice evolves are fertile ground for conspiracies, Nemmer said. It's disheartening to see that at the beginning of the pandemic, we talked so much about science publicly, and the public embraced it. But as things went on and some of the recommendations changed, and maybe the communication was not ideal throughout, then the public started questioning. Well, I would say that the public started questioning perhaps because we were told that we needed to flatten the curve, and there was talk of herd immunity. It was not explained to us at the beginning that the scientists had decided that the economy was going to be smashed, society was going to be destroyed, and our civil liberties were going to be erased. A piece from the Washington Times from David Keene about this uniformity in science. Blindly following scientific experts leads to dangerous real-world policies. Government by expert is not just undemocratic, but anti-democratic. Today's democratic progressives, like the early 20th century progressives they admire, like to claim that their policies are based in science rather than politics. Like candidate Joe Biden, they condemn those who refuse or fail to follow this science for societal problems. Thus, the Trump administration is constantly taken to task for its failure to follow the science on climate change and measures scientists recommend for the coronavirus. Yes, okay. There are suggestions that are made, there are policies which are put forward, and of course, there are going to be benefits and detriments. But what we have been told by the scientists not to worry about the detriments, that again, if the economy is smashed and society is destroyed, well, that's what has to be done. As Heather McDonald has pointed out, I read from her essay yesterday, if we really wanted to greatly reduce road accident deaths, then we could reduce the speed limit to 15 miles an hour. But we have decided not to do that. We have decided to make that tryout. Such unquestioning science worship can and sometimes does lead to absurd or even dangerous real-world policies. An early generation of progressives flocked to the perceived danger of overpopulation of the planet and the bogus science of eugenics. This led them to advocate the sterilization or elimination of disfavored minority groups from the general population using science to build a healthy, homogenous, and incidentally white nation. More a DR3 from David Keene. I guess you call him as an old school conservative Inc. figure. This sounds absurd to modern Americans, but attracted do-gooders like Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger and was admired by Adolf Hitler. Well, it was admired by an awful lot of people. Eugenics, that is. Not just Hitlerites or fascists. For months, the Twitter world has been reacting with glee whenever a science denier contracts the virus, as if anyone who disagrees with them actually deserve whatever they get. When President Trump himself came down with it last week, the anti-Trump world filled the internet with, "We told you so, it was his own fault, and he deserves whatever happens post." A former high-ranking Obama and Clinton campaign official went so far as to tweet that she hopes he will die of the virus. Doesn't look like he's going to. Professor Sunitra Gupta, an epidemiologist at the University of Oxford, thinks face masks should be voluntary. She says that testing is overrated and the government should focus on protecting the vulnerable. A positive test doesn't always mean that you're infectious. Well, it was decided right from the beginning that we were not going to focus on protecting the vulnerable. In fact, we did exactly the opposite. In both Canada and the United States, heads should have rolled for this, but no one is expected to take responsibility for their monstrous errors, even when thousands or tens of thousands of people have died as a result. I suppose I have to be very careful here. I'm just going to read this. I'm not going to endorse it because that would be troublesome. This is from Zero Hedge. Trump rages repeal Section 230 after Facebook, Twitter censorship. It appears the social media gagging has triggered Trump, who has rage tweeted repeal Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996, which provides immunity to online platforms from civil liability based on third-party consent and for the removal of content in certain circumstances. Having angered the blue checkmark gods of social media by daring to recover from COVID and removing his mask while socially distanced from everyone on the White House veranda, President Trump tweeted and posted on Facebook the following. Flu season is coming up. Many people every year, sometimes over 100,000, and despite the vaccine, die from the flu. Are we going to close down our country? No, we have learned to live with it, just like we are learning to live with COVID, in most populations far less lethal. It appears that the last phrase upset the Ministry of Truth, as Facebook has now removed the post and Twitter flagged it for spreading misleading and potentially harmful information related to COVID-18. There's just one thing. If you follow the science and the data from the CDC, Trump is right. Charts are presented. Estimated influenza disease burden by age group. United States 2018 to 2019 influenza season, and compared to the COVID mortality data from the CDC. And while the cohorts are not perfectly orthogonal due to data sourcing issues above, Trump is right that for certain groups, seasonal flu is more deadly than COVID-19. I believe I mentioned yesterday that in England, for I believe the last 5 or 6 weeks, deaths from influenza have surpassed those from COVID. But apparently that doesn't make any difference whatsoever. None. And apparently it's outrageous to bring it up. I go to Toby Young at Lockdown Skeptics, and Boris Johnson is looking, how would I put it, very mal-soigné today. A headline, Boris fiddles with his mask while Britain's burns. Boris gave a speech to the Conservative Party conference yesterday in which he addressed people's concerns that our national debt now exceeds 100% of GDP, that pubs, restaurants, and cinemas are vanishing from our high streets, and that 4 million people will soon be unemployed by talking about wind farms. He claimed that offshore wind will produce enough electricity to power every home in a decade, with Britain becoming the Saudi Arabia of wind. Bizarre tangent to go off on, and complete balls, obviously. In 2007, the Labour government said wind energy would power every home in Britain by 2020. In reality, it's less than 20%. Boris himself said in 2013 that wind farms couldn't pull the skin off a rice pudding. There was also a lot of boilerplate about the brilliance of the private sector and small businesses, but as Dan Hodges said on Twitter, has there ever been a PM speech where the rhetoric, small state, libertarian, entrepreneurial, has been so divorced from the reality of the policies he's actually implementing? Alison Pearson's verdict in The Telegraph is withering. To be brutally honest, it was probably just as well that the PM couldn't give his speech live to the conference in Birmingham as planned. Chilly silence would have been a more likely reception than rapturous applause. The Tory faithful are not just furious with their leader, they are positively adulterous, ready to run off with any Tom, Lawrence, or Nigel in protest at farcical restrictions, which even ministers fail to justify. In the latest Conservative Home poll of party members, Boris Johnson got a net satisfaction rating of minus 10.3. That came 24th out of 25 cabinet ministers. From hero to less than zero in 10 months. It's the stuff of classical tragedy. Those unimaginably dire figures for one of our best loved communicators give some sense of anger caused by the fact that the Conservatives, traditionally the party of the family and business, are causing immense harm to both in pursuit of the ultimately futile zero COVID strategy. For all his fluorescent follies, at least President Trump is bold enough to level with the American people, explaining that they need to keep COVID-19 in proportion. We must, as Trump says, learn to live with it. Far from echoing Chancellor Rishi Sunak's recent injunction to live without fear, the PM used his keynote speech to tell the British people that their kettle will soon be powered by great gusts of offshore wind. A personal hero of Boris's once wrote, "Nothing would be more fatal than for the government of states to get into the hands of experts. Expert knowledge is limited knowledge, and the unlimited ignorance of the plain man who knows where it hurts is a safer guide than any rigorous direction of a specialist." How right Churchill was, and how we wish the grand old man were still with us to stick Professor Neil Ferguson's little model in his cigar cutter. Many governments are using the pandemic as cover to silence dissent, stifle the free press, and disrupt elections, according to a new report by Freedom House, a US-based think tank. At least 91 of the 192 nations cited in the report, or 47%, have experienced restrictions on the news media as part of the response to the coronavirus outbreak. What began as a worldwide health crisis has become part of the global crisis for democracy, said Michael Abramowitz, president of the nonprofit organization. Governments in every part of the world have abused their powers in the name of public health, seizing the opportunity to undermine democracy and human rights. The Democracy Under Lockdown report said that despite 158 countries putting new restrictions on protests, a significant demonstration had taken place in at least 90 countries since the outbreak began. The report notes that government restrictions have been imposed on free speech in 72 countries, including 25 liberal democracies. Needless to say, one of those is the United Kingdom, and Scotland's zero COVID strategy isn't working. Cases in Scotland came close to zero in July, unlike in England, but now infections are rising both sides of the border at a similar rate. Again, as I never tire of saying, unless they're going to lock people up, unless they're going to weld them into their apartments and homes until they're dead, these people are going to come out eventually, and they are going to spread the virus. That's how viruses work. And for all of these people carrying on about science, they seem to have completely forgotten how science works with regard to viruses. That it's not a question of shaking your fist at the virus and threatening to take it outside, to give it an ass kicking. None of that works. The British government were planning to have a yes-no vote in the House of Commons later today about whether to renew the 10 p.m. curfew, but have pulled it after it became clear there was a risk of defeat. And the Daily Mail, which I suppose is considered to be Britain's, or England rather, most strident newspaper, seems to have turned on Boris Johnson, saying that he has botched everything, that he is breaking Britain, and that is clearly not a good sign at all for the Prime Minister. Let's have a look at the chat. Chogo King 666, atone for your racism. Yes, virus. How dare you? Don't you know this is 2020, the year of Black Lives Matter? Chogokin 666 again, did Gavin Newsom really ask people to put their masks on after each bite while dining out, or is this satire? It is not satire. Not at all. Oddly specific, 106K must be someone important's county, says John S. Jim Smith, how about when the minority population exceeds that of the majority? Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe in these cases, once again, we should accede to the wisdom of the late Peter Simple and bring out the prejudometer, which measures racial prejudice in prejudons, the internationally scientifically recognized unit of racial prejudice. That would seem to be the only way. William Hicks, Do Your Part, reminds me of the propaganda satire of Starship Troopers. And I suppose that is one of those instances where, yes, that outrageous movie, not so outrageous anymore. And of course, there's a meme going around about another Paul Verhoeven film, RoboCop. And what happens in RoboCop? Oh, what, the governments take over, crime rises. Big business takes over government, crime rises. Yes, I'll read it exactly. Remember in the RoboCop movies when corporate America aids criminals and helps incite riots so they can lower property values and buy up the city while privatizing that city's police force? Ha ha, science fiction is crazy. Yeah, indeed it is. Jim Smith says, way back in the 1980s, New York radio personality Bob Grant would occasionally comment that we're slipping and sliding into third worldism. I guess that was before Giuliani was elected. But what they discovered in New York City was that it would seem the only way to keep crime down was arresting a large number of Black people. And they've decided they do not want to do that anymore because, of course, it is racist. David Wright says, please address Pat Buchanan's take on the election. He seems to believe all the polls and the anointed views of the debate, masks, etc. Time pass him by. I'd have to read his most recent column. Metatron says, the mask over your mouth is symbolic of the increasing censorship. Yes, it is rather painfully symbolic of this. But I suppose we're not supposed to notice this. De says, I don't know what the other 98% of unknown viruses and bacteria will do to me. LOL. Lola J says, as society has grown increasingly diverse, how do we construct priorities or reconstruct them? Should particular subpopulations' needs drive policy and practice for the majority? It's not just a question of the diversity, although that is a problem because multiculturalism is a universal solvent. It's the scale of population. And part of the scale is the media, the people getting their facts, their opinions, their attitudes from the media. That things are just too big. Apparently, there's just too much news, and so we can only have one properly approved view on everything. Oh, I like this from Chogokin 666. This mask kills fascists. Heck McNeck says, I'm not blackpilling here, but repeal Section 230 is the same sort of pointless saber rattling as lock her up. By the way, where's that birthright citizenship EO? It's back in the quiver. I don't think that it's a meaningless saber rattling, because if repealing Section 230 would be a death blow to Facebook, to YouTube, to Twitter, because then they would be civilly or criminally responsible for all of the defamation, copyright infringement, incitement, etc., which appears on these social media platforms. They can be a platform or they can be a publisher. They can't be both. Debrea says, yes, Lola, since Socrates poisoned himself, democratic tyranny is exercised under the supremacist majority. This is how feminism is the only supremacist movement in America today. How about Black Lives Matter? That seems to be very much a supremacist movement. William Hicks, is Boris Johnson wearing a mask? He's already had it. What the? It's just, people used to say hello, good morning, good afternoon, lovely day, isn't it? That sort of thing. Now they wear a mask. And that's the only social convention that we need. We human animals will never escape survival of the fittest, nor will we want to. The fittest it is. No, we won't escape survival of the fittest. Uh, Everyone, I won't say everyone knows this, but everyone who has spent, I don't know, say 5 minutes looking into this has heard of this term comorbidities. And what are these comorbidities? What are the most important ones? Obesity is the number one, particularly since it leads to cardiovascular disease, leads to stroke, leads to diabetes. And we know that there are certain cohorts in the United States who are especially prone to obesity, particularly morbid obesity. And this would be Blacks, Hispanics, American Indians. But we're not supposed to talk about that because what these are racialized communities, and I suppose part of being a racialized community is that white supremacists are shoving food down their throat 18 hours a day. Halper says, how about Rube Goldberg chambered face masks for eating? Yeah. Okay. Let's go back. Beatus, yes. Prolchow. You familiar with that phrase? I quite like it myself. So, what do we have? Oh, yes. Let's see what Alex Berenson has to say before we move off the ever distressing subject of COVID-19. Oh, here's an interview with Jane Fonda, who elderly members or viewers might remember her treason, her outright treason during the 1960s when she went to Hanoi and talked up North Vietnamese winning and the superiority of their anti-aircraft guns and all the rest of it. COVID is God's gift to the left. Berenson comments, someone said the quiet part out loud. Yeah. Let's see. Jesse Jackson once joked that if he walked on water, the headline would be Jesse can't swim. In Trump's case, it would be F that guy, which is hardly even subtext on CNN, etc. anymore. The fact that real Donald Trump, Berenson writes, has apparently made a near complete recovery from COVID in a matter of days is not newsworthy. The question is now, when he had his last negative test. This is in response to Ben Gittleson, who covers the White House for ABC. He doesn't appear to be. Is he wearing a mask in his avatar? He is not wearing a mask in his avatar. How is that possible? He said that, I don't know when he last tested negative. We're not asking to go back through a bunch of records and look backwards. That's actually White House spokesman. Nicholas Kristof had tweeted, Xi Jinping's oppressive legacy. He has systematically turned much of the world against China. That's a shame. Deng Xiaoping and Jiang Zemin understood the importance of soft power, but Xi is destroying it. Berenson comments, and thanks to the row, he's also systematically turned much of the world into China. Win-win. Remember back in the day when CNN tried to personalize the pandemic for you and pretend that everyone was at serious risk? I miss those days. At least we had some laughs. But they've learned their lesson. This is a statistical pandemic, and death counts are the winning hand. I just want to repeat something I said yesterday because I think it's important, and I don't think that enough people have paid attention to it. That disease has been personalized, particularly cancer. Cancer is always a battle or a struggle. Anyone with cancer is not just a patient. They're battling against cancer. And we speak of winning and losing this battle. This disease has been relentlessly personalized since at least March. Trump is trying to kill you. And that's not a question of number of cases, so-called, or number of deaths. No, Trump wants to kill you. And we had Joe Biden during the debate talking about the empty chairs at the dinner table. What empty chairs is he talking about? Especially since, once again, 2.8 to 3 million people die in the United States every year. And coronavirus is up to a little over 210,000, with the number of deaths have stalled. The numbers have been juiced, but never mind that. So we're 9 months into this, a little over 9 months into this. We have a death toll of 210,000, with 2.8 million to 3 million people dying in the United States every year. But no, we just don't want to talk about that, because it seems, even with people who the experts that we see in the media, that they seem to be unable to comprehend any number larger than 1,000. There is a vice presidential debate on tonight. Mike Pence versus Kamala Harris. It's their only debate. It starts at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. The coronavirus pandemic, this is from NBC News, is expected to be a prominent topic at the debate, which comes less than a week after President Trump was diagnosed with COVID-19 as head of the White House coronavirus task force. Pence will likely face questions over the administration's response to the pandemic. Despite testing positive for the coronavirus less than a week ago, President Trump returned to the Oval Office on Wednesday afternoon and released a video where he declared himself cured as a result of the experimental antibody drug cocktail he'd been administered. To me, it wasn't a therapeutic, it just made me better. I call that a cure, Trump said in a 5-minute video. The video showed Trump, his skin looking darker than it had during his hospital day, speaking quickly, and his voice sounded jittery. Joe Biden's voice sounds jittery every single day that he graces America with his presence. I don't know, for an hour or two, taking softball questions from selected reporters. It's not just his voice sounds jittery, he sounds deranged or close to it, but that's not, again, that's not important. I'm going to go into this now, this question of the media being in the tank for Biden to an extent that has never been seen. The media was in the tank for Hillary Clinton, but Hillary Clinton, despite coming down with pneumonia, or so she said during the 2016 campaign, had a physical and mental vitality that Biden entirely lacks. Adam Mill writes in American Greatness, why doesn't it feel like Biden is winning? On a Tuesday, November 8th, 2016 at 7 p.m., I entered an Uber to travel to a Chicago area stand-up comedy club in search of escape from the inevitable. The New York Times set Clinton's percentage chance at victory in the high 90s. The driver had his radio tuned to a panel of NPR election experts assembled to announce the results as they came in. Most of the panel members chirped enthusiastically about Clinton's inevitable victory. But one Clinton supporter spoke in hushed tones regarding the results from a particular county in Florida. I could hear it in his voice. My news sources still showed a likely Clinton victory, but this expert's voice told the truth. The polls were wrong. As we approach the next election, the polls again show an insurmountably persistent Trump deficit in the popular vote, and even in key battleground states. Poll aggregator Nate Silver estimates Trump's approval to be below Obama, Clinton, and Reagan at similar points in their presidencies. Silver fixes the chance of a Biden victory at 81% as of his writing on October 5th. The betting markets show a recent collapse in confidence that Trump will be reelected. So why doesn't it feel like Biden is winning? If we had no polls, betting markets are professional pontificators, what outcome would we predict from the things that we can observe with our own eyes and ears? Let's run through a few non-scientific intangibles that don't seem to be lining up with the polling. First, the media is actively sheltering Biden. If a Biden victory were indeed inevitable, Would we see such vigorous coordination by the media to shelter and prop up Biden? As I recently noted, even a casual observer could see the media seem to be tipping off Biden on the already softball questions it intended to ask. It is also clear that the moderator at the first debate frequently interfered to protect Biden from questions about his son's corruption, potential Biden Supreme Court nominees, Biden's position on phasing out private insurance, Biden's specific criticism of Trump's COVID-19 policies, and the reason for Biden's law enforcement support deficit. In addition, it's become patently obvious that the Biden campaign and the media intended a strategy of releasing a coordinated scandal hit on Trump every 2 to 3 days until Election Day. For example, the Bob Woodward piece, the Atlantic hit piece, the New York Times hit piece on Trump's taxes, and the new coordinated mischaracterization of Trump's so-called failure to condemn white supremacists, since a mere 99 times of denouncing them simply won't suffice, and he is required to do it for the 100th time as called upon by Chris Wallace. Voters don't vote to ban their new guns. For 6 months of 2020, approximately 19 million firearms have been sold, representing more than one firearm for every 20 Americans. Acute shortages of ammunition for AR-15s point to a large group of voters who might feel their guns will be targeted by a Biden administration. It seems counterintuitive that gun owners would vote for a candidate promising to ban those same weapons. What about Biden's incompetent messaging? Biden and his campaign just don't act like they think they're winning. First, his imitative theme, Build Back Better, despite the awkward alliteration, is essentially identical to Make America Great Again. He's played a prevent-defense style campaign by avoiding issues in public appearances. Biden prefers to attack Trump rather than articulating policy intentions. After months of campaigning by Zoom, he suddenly emerged to conduct a smattering of lightly attended functions. Yet while polls tell us that Biden has never stopped beating Trump, the campaign abruptly lurched from raising money to bail out rioters to an unconvincing law and order stance. Then the Biden campaign made another radical lurch from encouraging their voters to mail in ballots to voting in person. Most recently, the Biden campaign promised to pull negative ads attacking the COVID-19 positive president, but failed to do so. Yes, I'm sure it's a surprise, a shock even, to viewers of this live stream that Chelsea Handler has got her kit off once again. Something to do with instructing people how to vote by mail. And Sarah Silverman, she's got them right out in front, in her hands. And I don't know, this seems a little disappointing after 2016. Back in 2016, she was promising some sort of lesbo action or simulated lesbo action to help Trump lose. I'm just reminded of Sarah Jessica Parker's character in David Mamet's film State and Maine, where she is demanding more money to appear naked from the waist up in a scene, even though this is in her contract. And I believe what a line producer is disgusted by this and says that we've all seen her tits so often, we could draw them from memory. And Sarah Silverman is exactly in that position. The campaign is full of toxic political correctness. In the face of the George Floyd death, the left seemed to have stormed all of America all at once with new speech rules. Simply failing to enthusiastically cheer the violent neo-Marxist Maoist groups burning and looting our cities will get you fired by our Chinese canoodling corporate overlords. Many Trump votes were cast as a protest to the suffocating political correctness atmosphere of 2016. Since that atmosphere has become even more suffocating, those protest votes may grow. Even as the media pushes the Trump is a white supremacist narrative, minorities have begun to peel away from the Democrats in increasing numbers. History is not on Biden's side. He is an incumbent. Clinton beat Bush, Reagan beat Carter, and Carter beat Ford. But how does Joe Biden compare to those three candidates? The intensity of Trump's campaign is unstoppable. To quote one phrase making the rounds, Trump supporters will fight murder hornets, COVID-19, and rioters to vote in person. Biden supporters hate Trump, but Biden himself does not inspire hope or confidence the way an Obama or Clinton did. There is a great upheaval of our population underway. Many have commented on the mass exodus happening across the country as the middle class flees the urban areas. Some of this is brought on by the telework revolution that makes living near the office an expensive luxury. But a significant number of Americans are fleeing high crime, chaos, and taxes that plague the Democrat-run cities. Some will take their Democrat voting habits with them, but many more will either fail to vote during the transition or will vote against the party that drove them from their city homes. Trump has made fools out of thousands of prophets predicting his doom. While the public consumes a steady diet of polls commissioned by the same news organizations that so obviously want to wish a Trump defeat, in reality, we know that the campaigns conduct their own secret polling. Would news organizations deliberately fake polls in order to manufacture the consent that would lead to Biden winning? I think that they would. Why do I think that? Because they have made it clear increasingly and stridently that they do not believe Trump to be a legitimate president, and they do not believe that there are any circumstances in which Trump could be a legitimate president. Beyond that, they believe that Trump is the avatar of white supremacism, which is literally hunting down every black person who leaves his or her home. And so, under circumstances like that, the phrase "by any means necessary" comes to mind. This is from Jordan Schachtel on Substack. Buried lead. New WHO estimate downgrades COVID-19 death rate by 3.8 to 7.7 times. Talk about burying the lead. The World Health Organization held an entire summit this week without telling anyone the most important news about their new calculations. Their COVID-19 death rate estimate has plummeted. On Monday, a top WHO official released the organization's best estimate for global COVID-19 infections, placing that number at 10% of the world's population, or around 760 million. The Associated Press reports best estimates 1 in 10 people worldwide may have been infected by the coronavirus, more than 20 times the number of confirmed cases. There's a logical impossibility here that they walked right into. If the number of people infected is many, many times more than confirmed cases, that obviously means that the death rate is many, many times less than they have warned about or screeched about previously. The most important part of the WHO estimate, the statistical element in the room, remained unspoken. With just over 1 million with/from COVID-19 deaths registered worldwide, that drops the WHO's COVID-19 infection fatality rate to just 0.13%, which is significantly lower than the WHO literature assessed just 2 months ago. The WHO infamously placed the original COVID-19 case fatality rate estimate at 3.4%. It was unclear at the time whether there was much of a separation between confirmed cases and the total number of cases. Early literature from the WHO on COVID-19 estimated that there was somewhere between a 2 to 7 times gap between IFR and CFR. That would place the WHO's IFR number based on a CFR of 3.4% at somewhere between 0.5 to 1.5%. These fear models, based on the 3.4% number, were taken to the president by doctors Fauci and Birx, who insisted that millions of Americans would die from COVID-19 if the United States did not institute draconian lockdowns. And of course, that's not true. Let's talk about Kamala Harris. Here's a piece from America, which is a Jesuit magazine, or the official Jesuit magazine. It's a pale shadow of what it used to be. Kamala Harris filled 2 criteria that Joe Biden wanted in a running mate. She is a woman and she is Black, 2 critical Democratic constituencies ahead of the November election. This piece is by Yonat Shimron from the Religion News Service. Harris, the 55-year-old junior senator from California, has other advantages in the 2020 presidential race. She embodies the future of American religion in a time of expanding religious pluralism. The country's youngest generation, many of them children and grandchildren of immigrants, will recognize in Harris a kind of multi-faith and spiritual belonging unfamiliar to the mostly white Christian majority of past decades. The assumption here is that, Muslims, do American Muslims, does it multi-faith appeal to them? Does multi-faith really appeal that much to Hindus, Sikhs? Does it? This is simply asserted. It's not demonstrated. Harris, who was born in Oakland, California, to a Jamaican immigrant father, and I would point out she was almost certainly an anchor baby. Donald Harris and an American immigrant mother, Shyamala Gopalan, is both Black and South Asian. She grew up in a home that accommodated both Christian and Hindu religious practices. What are these Christian religious practices in her upbringing? I've not yet heard of any. As an adult, she married Douglas Emhoff, a Jewish Brooklyn lawyer. I suppose she could go the whole hog and claim to be a Buddhist. There are a lot more young Americans who, identity-wise, are like Kamala Harris, mixed race with a background of lots of different cultural, ethnic, and religious experiences, says Ibu Patel, founder and president of the Interfaith U Corp. That's just a Democratic fact. To be sure, Biden and Harris identify as Catholic. You can identify whatever you like, but in many religions, there are rules for belonging. He a Catholic, she a Black Baptist, but the ticket that will formally be nominated in Milwaukee represents a stark contrast to President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence, who are both white, Protestant, and male. Boo! I'll point out that white Protestant males were the founders of the United States, but that's not really relevant, is it? Harris, who was a member of the Third Baptist Church of San Francisco, brings an ethnically and racially diverse version of Christianity to the ticket. She also has an appreciation of the contributions of many non-Christians who happen to be family members. Yes, and she has been photographed wearing a caste mark on her forehead. And my own rule is that anyone who wears a caste mark is not allowed to speak about equality ever. In that sense, it says Jones, Robert P. Jones, CEO and founder of Public Religion Research Institute, the Biden-Harris ticket looks a lot more like America's future, and the Trump-Pence ticket looks a lot more like America's past. That's not necessarily a plus, actually. Not necessarily a plus, because voters may not be so confident about the future represented about Kamala Harris, who seems to be entirely atomized. Where is she from? What's her history? What does she believe in? I don't know, everything and nothing. But of course, this is ridiculous, because we've already been through this. Okay, we went through this with Barack Obama, who was hailed as exactly the same sort of thing. Obama gave a 2004 interview with the Chicago Sun-Times columnist Kathleen Falsani, in which, despite his ostensible belonging in a Protestant church, he revealed that he believes in nothing. He believes in absolutely nothing. So the reporter is drinking decaf. He grabs a Naked Juice protein shake. Okay, so what do you believe? Obama was asked. He responded, I am a Christian, so I have a deep faith. So I draw from the Christian faith. Do you see how those two sentences, they're not the same? I have a deep faith. Okay, I think I understand what that means. I draw from the Christian faith. That could mean anything. On the other hand, I was born in Hawaii, where obviously there are a lot of Eastern influences. I lived in Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world, between the ages of 6 and 10. My father was from Kenya, and although he was probably most accurately labeled as agnostic, his father was Muslim. And I'd say probably intellectually, I've drawn as much from Judaism as any other faith. So I'm rooted in the Christian tradition. Doesn't seem like you're rooted in any tradition. I believe that there are many paths to the same place. That's not what Christians believe. Christians believe that Jesus Christ is the sole path to heaven, that there's only one that is at the core of Christianity. So the same place, which is a belief that there is a higher power, a belief that we are connected as a people, that doesn't have to be a religious belief at all. There are values. Values are not the same things as truth, Barack Obama, that transcend race or culture. I thought we were talking about religion, that move us forward. And there's an obligation for all of us individually as well as collectively to take responsibility to make those values lived. Note the use of the word values, which has replaced the word truths. Values are endlessly mutable. Have you always been a Christian? I was raised more by my mother, and my mother was Christian. Any particular flavor? No. My grandparents, who were from small towns in Kansas, my grandmother was Methodist, my grandfather was Baptist, etc. Oh, by the time I was born, they were, I think my grandparents had joined a Universalist church. Okay. Yeah. Do you remember when Obama was running for president and he talked about Americans clinging to their guns and their Bibles? This did not suggest to me, and I don't think it would suggest to you, a man who's particularly invested in either America or Christianity, because clearly he isn't. Barack Obama strikes me as being a stone atheist. There's no other way to describe it. But he joined a Black Protestant church in Chicago because it's de rigueur. As Booker T. Washington pointed out back in 1910 in his autobiography, which I spoke about last week. An amusing piece from Revolver, which I may have spoken of in the past, is from August the 15th, climbing the greasy pole and sucking up to get to the top, the Kamala Harris story. You've got to hand it to Kamala Harris. Before ascending to the tippy top of presidential politics, she knew how to suck up to the right people in order to climb the greasy pole of Willie Brown's Democratic machine. Could this get any more arch? In the deeply cutthroat, here we go again, world of San Francisco politics, all while finding the time to occasionally relax and smoke the pipe of marijuana. Oh my, oh my. Harris is a dangerous charlatan who worked her way to the top as an immigrant daughter of privilege who took advantage of affirmative action programs reserved for Black American descendants of slaves before becoming the mistress of a top San Francisco politician who appointed her to a plum position at a government make-work job. Now she's on the brink of taking her ditzy floozy turned ruthless prosecutor act to the highest office in the land as the willing figurehead of a totalitarian power grab by the anti-white communist left. Kamala's life begins with what is essentially stolen valor against Black Americans. Harris's father was a Stanford economics professor from Jamaica. Her mother was a privileged Brahmin from India and a PhD holding cancer researcher. By any objective measure, Harris was a child of privilege in America. Inexplicably, her career was kickstarted by affirmative action. An article from UC Hastings Law describes Harris as the direct beneficiary of a program intended for the disadvantaged, that is to say, the Legal Education Opportunity Program. Despite being an AA graduate of a low-ranked law school, Harris enjoyed a meteoric career trajectory thanks to a relationship as the floozy girlfriend of a married man. According to USA Today, former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown would often travel to parties with his wife on one hand and a girlfriend on the other. That suggests swinging. Does it not? I was looking at Kamala Harris speaking, or her acceptance speech at the Democratic Convention recently, and people have pointed out that hello, Americans, the way she delivers this, it's very much how one expects an alien overlord to speak. Hello, Earthlings. And this fatuous grin she has on her face, this is supposed to be a solemn moment, actually, at least at the beginning. When you finished your speech and everyone is clapping like seals, then you can break out the big grin. The California Medical Assistance Commission, established during Governor Jerry Brown's tenure, meets monthly and is not seen as a full-time post. But it paid $72,000 a year, and this was quite some years ago. And she was also appointed to the Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board, which paid $97,000 a year. We're talking about going back to the mid-90s here, and these are essentially no-show jobs. Kamala Harris' phoniness doesn't end there. As Attorney General, she locked up almost 2,000 people for marijuana offenses, but that didn't stop her from bragging about smoking marijuana and listening to Tupac in a sad attempt to pander to Black Americans who actually descend from slaves. Yes, of course, it turns out that she doesn't really know anything about Tupac. When he started recording, or even when he died, or even the fact that he is dead and has been dead for quite some time. But let's see just how giggly she is tonight. Some good news on immigration. I saw today that Ann Coulter has decided to make the supreme sacrifice and vote for Donald Trump. Again, she sounds like a spurned lover. This is what she sounds like. She does not sound rational and hasn't for quite some time. It's a story from the Wall Street Journal yesterday. Trump administration announces overhaul of H-1B visa program. Employers will be required to pay the high-skilled foreign workers significantly higher wages, which obviously lessens the appeal of the entire program. Ken Cuccinelli, the number 2 official at the DHS, said that he expects about 1/3 of H-1B visa applications would be rejected under the new set of rules. Cuccinelli and Patrick Pizzella, the Deputy Secretary of Labor, said the changes were necessary to protect American workers whom the administration believes are being undercut by foreign workers on H-1B visas. America's immigration laws should put American workers first, Pizzella said, pointing to what he described as increasingly stringent wage requirements on foreign workers. The result is that U.S. workers are being ousted from good-paying middle-class jobs and being replaced by foreign workers. I suppose people could complain that there shouldn't be any H-1B. Yes, of course, but you didn't think this was going to happen all at once, did you? Immigration has been slashed. All forms of immigration to the United States have been slashed by Trump. And he has used COVID-19 as an excuse, if you will, to pretty much stop traditional immigration. Here's a story from Breitbart. President Trump's administration is weighing more crackdowns to ensure American taxpayers are not footing the bill for the cost of legal immigrant welfare dependents to the United States. Last year, the Trump administration published a new regulation that made it more difficult for welfare-dependent legal immigrants seeking green cards to permanently resettle in the U.S. The regulation, previous estimates have stated, equates to nearly $60 billion tax cut for American taxpayers. A new regulation being weighed by the administration would make sure that American citizen sponsors of foreign nationals for green cards have the means to cover all of the associated costs. Of course, people will talk about an immigration moratorium, and I fully support this moratorium in my own country, and I can't see how the United States needs immigrants when it has quite possibly tens of millions of immigrants who are still illegal, who have in no way been integrated into American society, who simply make life worse for Americans. But let's get to the heart of this. If your income is so low that you qualified for means-tested welfare programs, why should you be allowed to sponsor new immigrants? Center for Immigration Studies Director of Policy, Jessica Vaughn, wrote about the proposed regulation. The CIS study has revealed about 63% of non-citizen households in the U.S. use at least one form of taxpayer-funded welfare, while only about 35% of native-born American households are on welfare. This means that non-citizen households use nearly twice as much welfare as native-born American households. Remember that. Remember that figure, 63 to 35. when anyone tells you about the superior work ethic and entrepreneurship of immigrants, it's bogus. It's completely bogus. Oh, and the American conservative seems to have noticed that if current trends continue, or at least the current trends before Trump became president, that white people are going to be a minority in the United States by perhaps as early as 2035. The case for minority obstructionism, if a minority cannot exercise political power equal to that of the majority, democratic tyranny is inevitable. This is by Hunter Durensis, and argues, John Calhoun, yes, his views on this, particularly his disquisition on government. It is not necessarily true that a majority will impose tyranny on minorities. I mean, there's many kinds of minorities that exist, but in a society which is polarized, fragmented, balkanized, a society which is quickly moving towards the war of all against all, except that the majority in the country has been ordered to put its hands behind its back and to put tape over its mouth. Yes, it seems pretty clear again that if current trends continue, a white minority in the United States would be tyrannized. But of course, then there's the interesting situation that, of course, blacks, they have stayed pretty steady at 13% of the population. Hispanics are now more at 18%. They don't seem to get along very well. Then we have there are all these new immigrants to the United States who do not have the historic connection to the United States that blacks and Hispanics have, who essentially don't really care about these issues. So it could be that the infighting amongst all the different minorities would make it more difficult for them to impose a tyranny on a white minority, particularly if the white minority seeks to form coalitions with certain minorities. Because believe you me, when it gets to a fight, a desperate fight for spoils, all of this model minority hatred of white supremacy or whatever, that will fall away, just like that. Let's go to J5 Killer. The Hanging Chads had tweeted, "You never really see Kamala gets challenged, and when she does, she collapses." And this is a reference to a Democratic debate when surfer mommy Tulsi Gabbard took on her record as Attorney General of California, and Kamala was not best pleased. J5 Killer says 100% this. Carmelo is a nasty, underqualified, overpromoted nitwit. She has negative charisma, an awful speaking voice. I have to agree with that. She really does have a terrible speaking voice and a way of annoying her most sympathetic supporters. Look for Pence to wipe the floor with her. Yeah, and J5 Killer has been talking about the blackpilling that's going on. Oh, the polls show that Biden is leading, I don't know, 74-20, something like that. But he points out that Trump is now spending big money on get out the vote efforts in key states. Remember how he got so many votes in an uncontested primary, doubling Obama's 2013 total. That was the GOTV practice run, door knocking and personal contact. Trump is going all in on GOTV. Meanwhile, Slow Joe is running more TV ads. Political consultants love ads because they get a commission on ad placement. What do you think? Why do you think political consultants hate Trump? Colin the Patriot had tweeted, Google Trends early vote and vote by mail numbers in Wisconsin, Nevada, Michigan, Arizona favoring Trump. Party registration numbers, enthusiasm gas, primary election totals. How many metrics do we need to observe before we realize polls are fake and meant to shape elections, not measure them? Yes, this is my pipe dream, or one of my pipe dreams, that I do not believe that polls are free speech, as that term has traditionally been understood. I think they are means to manufacture consent. That is all they are. Again, personally, I prefer a Trump victory, says J5 Killer, but I recognize that the derp state, the left, and the media are playing with fire. If they succeed in getting rid of the orange man and they go too hard to prevent another populist from rising, they'll unleash a cleansing hurricane. The anger is there, the pressure is high. I don't think we'll get a Civil War 2.0, but we can get a political movement that they'll regret forever. And if they criminalize the right and try to throw Trump in prison, they'll get something even worse than politics. Well, that remains to be seen. If Trump loses, they will put Trump in prison, and they will criminalize the right. There will be no free speech whatsoever allowed for anyone to the right of, I don't know, Bill Kristol. No doubt in my mind about that. Whether that will be availing for them. Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator, says that farm murder over the weekend was gruesome. Are we talking about South Africa here? Okay. DB Cooper says J5 Killer is awesome. I hope that he's not a sock because I want to believe there is someone with that name. He's not a sock. I've spoken to him. I interviewed him at length in my old podcast back in, 2016. So I know that he's a real person. I'm not going to say anything more than that. Yo Mama says the Cherokee were led by a woman called Man Killer. I remember the Seattle Seahawks football team used to have a quarterback called Sonny Six Killer, which is a pretty martial name. And then they had the quarterback after that was called Krieg, or they pronounced it Craig, meaning war, which is warlike by definition. Chogokin 666 says, what's all this about Kim Guilfoyle? Yeah, I don't know. Oh, someone, Helper mentioned Sonny Six Killer. Okay, what else do we have here in the chat? I see. They're talking about South Africa with regard to whites becoming a minority. Of course, whites were always a minority when they decided to take over all of the territory of the Union of South Africa, which in retrospect seems like a mistake. Visionary Companion says, am I my brother's keeper? Was Cain's a retort when God asked him about Abel. Keeping someone like an animal is understood to be a ridiculous thing. Obama was clueless when he stated pompously like that. I really think that, I said this years ago, I don't consider Obama to be an American for the reason that, he's half Kenyan by birth and his mother was an America hater. That he did not grow up in the United States of America. I do not consider Hawaii or Indonesia to be part of the United States of America. When he spoke in Germany, when he had a campaign rally in Germany in 2016, what kind of American would hold a campaign rally in Germany during an election? He referred to himself, of course, as a citoyen du monde, a citizen of the world. He did not, apart from a brief visit to Seattle when he was a newborn, he did not set foot in the continental United States until he was 18 years old and went to Occidental College. He ended up in Chicago, and it seems clear to me that he regards this black liberation theology as just nonsense, Jacob and the white devils, but he just made a decision that apparently this is what one must do in order to get ahead in black politics. And it's all crazy to me, but I'll just nod my head, and I'll just keep nodding my head for 20 years. Can the professor say Ken Cuccinelli 3 times fast? Ken Cuccinelli, Ken Cuccinelli, Ken Cuccinelli. There you go. Yeah, Tupac again. Kamala is an anti-white extremist, says Tricky Woo. I don't believe that she's any kind of extremist. She's just going to go along with what is demanded of her. I mean, she married a Jewish man with 2 children. She, of course, is childless by choice, which I do not believe is a very good sign. But increasingly, we see that the female politicians are childless like choice. Theresa May was one. They pretty much all seem to be in my country. Politics takes a lot of time. Similarly, I think that's the reason why we're seeing so many homosexuals in politics, because politics takes a lot of time and it does not leave much for anything else, like a family life. I don't know that politics has to take up as much time that it does. I mean, William Gladstone, he read several books a week when he was prime minister. So much of this issues management, it just strikes me as being pointless. Something happened today which is going to be forgotten in a week, or it may be forgotten by tomorrow, but we need to all get on the same page about what the message is here. I just don't see it as necessary, and I think that it leads to a loss of confidence in politicians because people instinctively understand that they're faking it. Let's see, there's a question here. Emmett Kelly's Earth says Obama is a congregant to the First Church of Nihilism. No, I believe that he's a congregant to the First Church of Obama. Seriously, that's what I think about him, that he worships himself. That I don't know, he's just so diffident and effeminate on top of it. And of course, the fact that he was elected president in 2008, we didn't even know what his legal name was at the time. That again, the fix was in, but how come there's someone running for president of the United States who's been a United States senator? No one seems to know anything about him. Really. D.B. Cooper says there's something really distasteful about Kamala. She's an unremarkable, I'll say, woman that will say anything depending on who gives her money. She has no authenticity. She was raised as, Hindu, not as black, but then she made the decision. I suppose she could have decided to stay in Canada, in Montreal, where she had largely grown up, but she was ambitious. So she went to Brown University, which is a historic black college. Perhaps that was seen as a kind of necessary sacrifice for someone like her to make. Arabor is the title of a famous novel by Joris Karl Huysman. It means against nature. I thought I would speak against some things that are against nature. Yes, I knew this was going to happen. It was just a question of when. This is from the Daily Mirror of London. A woman who once identified as a transgender man is suing the gender identity clinic that allowed her to begin her medical transition at just 16 years old. Kira Bell says she was referred to the Tavistock Clinic, which is just a notorious place. As a teenager, she felt distressed about her body, which made her feel gender dysphoria, which is the distress a person feels due to a mismatch between their gender identity and their sex. She had just 5 appointments with them and started taking male hormones when she was 16 before having a double mastectomy at the age of 20. Speaking on ITV's This Morning on Tuesday, Kira said she never had a psychiatric assessment to explore why she felt like she did, which she believes would have resulted in her never transitioning in the first place. She said, I grew up very gender non-conforming, so that along with sexuality struggles led to feelings of alienation. I became very depressed in my teens and definitely distressed about my body, and all that kind of manifested as gender dysphoria. I suspect, and I'm told, although this seems shocking to me, that more women are becoming men than men are becoming women. I mean, it's a different kind of lunacy, because with so many of the men, the autogynophilia, I'd have sex with me. You don't see that in the women who are going in the other direction. I suspect a lot of these women are doing it. Well, there's the social pressure. Apparently, these things happen in clusters. But I suspect that these women are not what would be considered traditionally attractive, and their problem with their body simply could be that it's not very attractive, or that they are like Cher's daughter, significantly overweight. Kira says she wasn't happy when she had her appointments with the clinic. It didn't feel like she was being listened to. She changed her name by deed poll, changed her official documents, and started to identify as male. But she believes the process was too fast and led to her making the wrong decisions. I can see now, when I reflect back, that it was all very rushed, and now I wish there was some psychiatric assessment. At the end of the day, I feel like I should have been explored into why I had those feelings and not just accepted as what they were. When you're on that pathway, it's hard to come out of that. And after those drastic changes have happened to your body, it's hard to admit you've gone down the wrong path. She feels that she's been stunted by the hormones and is now worried that she'll never have children. This is going to affect me for the rest of my life, and I have to make do with that and try to accept myself for how I am now and try to move on to that. She also expressed her opinion that a person can't change sex and claimed gender confirmation surgery and taking hormones won't always resolve psychological problems. Teenagers can't comprehend how it's going to affect their adult life. People may say it's helped them, but for how long? For 2, 5, 10 years? Kira has now been off hormones for 2 years. And I see the hosts of the show, Holly Willoughby, she's got her concerned face on, and Philip, what's his name, the host, this guy's almost 70, and he recently came out as homosexual. I suspect that she got rather a hostile response. Tavistock said, GIDS, the Gender Identity Development Service, is a safe and thoughtful service which puts the best interests of its patients and their families first. We won't comment on the ongoing proceedings and await the judgment of the court in due course. I expect trillions of dollars in damages to be paid, particularly when we're dealing with adolescents, people below the age of consent. When you get into people who are 14, 12, 10, 8, etc., it's, well, what this woman Kira says is absolutely true. Teenage girls will act in such a way that just like 5 years later, when they're in 20s, they're just absolutely horrified at the way that they acted and terrified that people will find out. And we're just talking about, say, sexual behavior. We're not talking about actually supposedly changing from a woman to a man because you don't like your body. There's a story from the LA Times, Molly Hennessy Fisk. She was really a warrior. Transgender migrant reaches U.S. only to die. Does the United States have a shortage of Hispanic transsexuals such that it needs to import them from foreign countries? I shouldn't have thought so. As Mayela Villegas crossed the bridge from Matamoros, Mexico to Texas, she looked like a success story. Defying the odds, she had been allowed into the United States to pursue her asylum claim. Do you know what Matamoros means? The town in Mexico is named after the town in Spain. It means hammer of the Moors. I really quite like that. That was a year ago, October 5th, 2019. We had met days before in the Mexican border tent camp, where she'd been living with about 2,000 others after migrating from El Salvador. White crosses on the nearby banks of the Rio Grande memorialized parents and children who had recently died trying to cross the river illegally. A 27-year-old transgender woman, Mayela, had been kidnapped and raped in Mexico and El Salvador. She told me those stories alone in her tent with the opening zip tight against eavesdroppers. In the camp, a migrant woman from Honduras had threatened to gut her with a knife. Mayela secretly recorded the threat on her phone, found a witness, and reported it to Mexican authorities. That became grounds for her successful U.S. asylum claim, which allowed her to enter the U.S. legally and settle with relatives in Houston. 7 months later, at the end of May, one of Mayela's friends messaged me on Facebook. Mayela was dead. Is there any way you can help us find what happened to her? And, there's a picture of her doing her makeup. Yes, very subtle there. Very subtle, putting on eyeliner. I was in Minneapolis covering Black Lives Matters protests and getting shot at by police. Oh, what a dangerous life Molly lives. I didn't want to believe Mayala had died, but I selected Polanco was right. Transgender women are often assaulted and killed. In August, 2 men were charged in an alleged hate crime attack and robbery of 3 transgender women in Los Angeles. At least 30 transgender and gender nonconforming people have been killed this year, according to the Alphabet People advocacy group Human Rights Campaign, more than all of last year. They never get into why this might be. That, for instance, that a great many of these transgender women, particularly the Black ones, work as prostitutes. Close to 50% of Black transgender women have AIDS. And there's a recurring problem with people like that working as prostitutes when their tricks find out that what they have paid for is not what they thought they were getting. They react with rage. Also point out that transgender women are not shrinking violets. They are typically the opposite of that and are often exceedingly aggressive and hostile. But we keep getting more propaganda, agitprop, for this. And let's talk about suicide here. Detectives reviewed Mayala's cell phone and found nothing to indicate she wanted to kill herself, even though the article says that she had thought of it. But the coroner's report noted a history of suicidal attempts and ruled the death a suicide. Because such government reports don't identify people like Mayala as transgender, it can be difficult to track how many die and why. Nationally, 40% of transgender adults attempted a suicide, nearly 9 times the rate for the general population, according to a 2015 survey by the National Center for Transgender Equality. Now, it could be that these figures are exaggerated, and it could be these figures are exaggerated in an attempt to gin up sympathy for transsexuals. But look at the message that this is sending. 4 out of 10 transgender adults can be expected to attempt suicide, which is not a very good advertisement, it seems to me, for this decision. Particularly, and there's another thing that the media doesn't report, although this has been known for decades, that a great many of the male to female transsexuals express, how shall we say, grave disappointment with their sex lives. And there's various disgusting aspects of this, such as dilation. I'll just mention the word. You can look it up if you like. But the common complaint, and this complaint is decades old, that I was told that I would experience sex as a woman with the same intensity that I experienced sex as a man, and it's simply not true. Let's see Belgium. Belgium's a fake country. Belgium went, at one point 2 years without a government, and no one seems to have noticed. Belgium was dominated some years ago by a pedophile ring. Yes, it actually was. You could look up Marc Dutroux about this. So it's not surprising. This is from Global Citizen, actually from Thomson Reuters. A transgender woman was sworn in as deputy prime minister in Belgium's new government October 1st, becoming the most senior trans politician in Europe. I'm told they don't do this anywhere else in the world. The first X to do Y. Oh, yes, and there's going to be no end to this. The first transsexual, then the first Black transsexual, or Hispanic transsexual, or immigrant transsexual, or whatever. Petra de Sutter, a gynecologist and Green Party member, of course, of the European Parliament, became one of 7 deputy prime ministers. Yeah, it's such an important job. They've got 7 of them in Belgium's coalition government, ending a 16-month deadlock after an inconclusive election. Their elections would be a lot more conclusive if they simply carved out new countries for the Dutch and for the French, or they could simply reabsorb those parts into the Netherlands or to France. And I'm curious, I'm looking at a picture of this person, and this person appears to be morbidly obese, which is not a particularly good advertisement for that. I shouldn't have thought. This from the World Economic Forum. This Black British hiker is tackling exclusion from the outdoors. A diversity gap in outdoor activities means a disproportionate share of visitors to public parks are white. And I suspect a disproportionate number of those who patronize grime music are black. So what? It would appear that in Britain, black people would rather listen to grime music than to take a walk in parks or down trails or, public highways. Ramblers, they call them. So what? In the US, about 90% of visitors to public parks are white, despite making about 60% of the population. Well, it has been noted that a lot of black people are frightened by rural areas. One UK hiker has created a community of women of color to help make outdoor activities more inclusive. As corporations, governments, organizations, and educational institutions confront what diversity inclusion looks like from the inside, what? I thought we were looking at what it looked like, the lack of it from the outside. One UK hiker has created community for people of colors outdoors. Rhiannon Fantinicon founded Black Girls Hike in 2019 to encourage Black women to explore the US countryside in the safety of sisterhood. Fantinicon came up with the idea when she noticed there were few people who looked like her involved in the hobby. Hiking is often considered a white-dominated activity. Well, I suspect it would be considered, say, an English or Scottish or Welsh activity. That might be part of the problem. And the Greater Manchester resident wanted to do her part to change that. The lack of representation in hiking is clear for all to see. Lack of representation in hiking. There's no benefit to this. We're not talking about certain degrees being given to certain people. We're not talking about certain jobs, membership in certain clubs or whatever. This is going outside. There's no status involved with it. This is not going to mean that you're going to be promoted. It doesn't mean you're going to earn more money. It doesn't mean any of those things. It's something I never associated with black people. It's not even marketed at black people. Again, hiking is not really marketed. It's just something that people like to do. I suppose the sporting goods stores, I'm thinking their posters probably very heavily represent black and non-white people. I have no question about that. I guess I'll check this out overnight and see what their advertisements look like. Yes, white people are trying to stop us from hiking. No one is trying to stop them from hiking. Here's a story by Paul Kersey, as he styles himself on UNS. Yes, against nature. Certain things that we cannot say. In the end, the only true way to address gun violence is to admit the racial dynamic to fatal and non-fatal gun violence in the USA. It's that simple. The Buffalo News was just capable of admitting those responsible for gun violence in the city, disproportionately impacting black people in Buffalo, are black, not white supremacists, not white supremacists, not white nationalists, not those clinging to white privilege, nor maintaining systemic racism or implicit bias, but black people shooting other black people in the city of Buffalo. So we learn about a woman, mother of three, killed a week after her 23rd birthday. And of course, these are always very sad stories. Messages of love scrawled in blue, red, and black marker hang on pieces of poster board on a nearby sidewalk. 37 tea-light candles spell out Ray. On September 19th, Rayshana Johnson was killed and 4 others were shot near that intersection in the second quintuple shooting of the year in Buffalo. All 5 victims were black. Gun violence in Buffalo continues to disproportionately affect people of color. So far this year, more than 8 of every 10 shooting victims were Black. Poverty in these neighborhoods is the key factor, community activists say. Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? Buffalo Police Commissioner Byron Lockwood and activists both agree that more needs to be done to steer young people away from resorting to violence. Yeah, it's just the way that these stories are phrased to steer them away. It's as if, let's say the academic track versus the trades track. Oh no, we think, we like your trades, but we know you like the trades, but we think that you're actually, university material. Or conversely, well, we think you'd really be better off, learning a trade. This isn't like that at all. Steer them away. That apparently it had never occurred to these people that shooting others is not only, grossly immoral, but typically it leads, or I won't necessarily typically say, but it very often leads to personal disaster. The shootings in Buffalo mirror what's happening in other major cities across America, and criminologists are still trying to parse out the role of the COVID-19 pandemic in the surge in violence. They're also happening as the Black Lives Matter movement has forced questions about race, racism, and the U.S. criminal justice system. The shooting at Jefferson and Glenwood was Buffalo's second quintuple shooting in less than a month. Lockwood said police investigations often find one individual responsible for 3 or 4 shootings. It's a very small number of people causing this havoc on the East Side. The vast majority of people are law-abiding citizens. I'm afraid that is not very reassuring. If I learned that the vast number of people, let's say 80% of the people in the neighborhood I live in now, were law-abiding citizens to the extent that they weren't likely to get into multiple shootings, I would be terrified. Absolutely terrified. For 3 straight months, the number of people shot each month exceeded 40. Murders are out of control in Buffalo. Young people, they really don't have anywhere to go. This is an argument which has been made from the 1960s. Let's build community centers and then young Black people won't shoot each other anymore. The community centers were built and it didn't make any difference. This from Leroy Love, who runs a barber shop around the corner. So when they meet up, it's hundreds of them usually. They'll pick a block or something, have a party, or if there happens to be a party, they'll show up there and something seems to go wrong. Yes, it just came out of the blue. It went wrong, like a pipe burst or something like that. Now, we're talking about someone deciding to take a gun to a party and then take it out from the waistband or wherever, and then to empty it just in one direction. Oh, there's some person who's dissed me. I'm just going to fire all the rounds here. And if I hit 4, 5, 6 other people, if the bullets ricochet and kill some child, yeah, well, what are you going to do? Got to represent. This is just, I don't know. Let's see. Residents who live in some areas of the city face disproportionate levels of gun violence. Yeah. How about that? A 2016 news analysis of shooting data showed the entire East Side, which accounts for only a third of the city's population, accounted for about 3/4 of all shootings in the city from 2011 through 2016. Yeah. Okay, and we know who's living in these neighborhoods, and we know that the people with any money or any sense get out of these neighborhoods. But there's just, again, this assumption that this violence is, falling from the sky like rain. And in this regard, I will mention again Jill Levy's book, Ghetto Side, which is an analysis of Black murder in Los Angeles. And the appalling conclusion is that people know who the murderers are, and that pretty much everyone in these communities is related to a murderer. But everybody know, as they say, but snitches get stitches. And until that changes, We're going to continue to have the sad cases of 23-year-old mother of three being shot to death. And we're going to have the same pitiful spectacle where people pretend that the problem is guns and not people murdering each other over trifles, because this is typically what we are talking about. Black Lives Matter is a movement. It's an official movement. And who's paying for it? Well, there's a piece in the tablet here by Sean Cooper. Is Warren Buffett the wallet behind Black Lives Matter? The Tides Network is a powerful instrument leveraged by billionaires working to change America while shielding their philanthropic dollars for public scrutiny. Here's how it works. In July 2013, the seeds of the most powerful protest movement of the modern era were planted. In a relentless climate of nationwide demonstrations touched off by the killing of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin, an activist named Alicia Garza uttered the phrase, Black Lives Matter. A few months later, in October 2013, Garza took a job in an organization called the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and the nonprofit immediately saw a dramatic increase in its funding from organizations tied to some of the wealthiest people in the world, people with names like Buffett, Soros, and Rockefeller. This spring, in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, the movement became a global interest. Some 1.1 million individual donations worth an estimated $33 million flowed into its coffers. Large corporations, including in Silicon Valley and retail, have been quick to follow suit, with brands like Square, Ubisoft, Google, Spanx, Tom's Shoes, Lululemon, Nike, and Anastasia Beauty, all making 6- and 7-figure organizational pledges. The received wisdom, echoing the official mythology around Black Lives Matter Global Network, Inc., co-founded by Garza, along with fellow activists Opal Tometi and Patrice Colors, is that BLM is a grassroots movement that rose up organically out of the widespread rage sparked by the viral videos of Black American men killed by police officers. According to this account, the political priorities of activists in Brooklyn screaming at cops and calling to defund the police have been fused with those of suburban moms in Peloton t-shirts, hand-painting signs with their kids using the BLM hashtags of large multinational conglomerates, an unusual union of protesters, and the corporate boardroom spurred on by nothing more than everyone's shared outrage over racism. So BLM was founded by 3 women, and 2 of them are, lesbians out of the 3. It's not really representative, is it? I don't think it is. But again, this is one of the things the media really doesn't like to talk about, the extent to which Black affairs in the United States are dominated by women, and the extent to which Black culture in the United States seems to be disappearing under a massive wave of homosexuality. There's, however, another version of events in which the heartfelt dedication to racial justice is only the forward-facing side of a more complicated movement. Behind the street-level activism and emotional outpouring is a calculated machinery built by establishment money and power that is seized on racial politics, in which some of the biggest capitalists in the world are financially backing a group of self-described trained Marxists, a label that Colores enthusiastically applies to herself and the group's other co-founders. These bedfellows, whose stories and fortunes are never publicly presented as related, are in reality intertwined under the umbrella of a fiscal sponsor named the International Development Exchange, a modestly endowed West Coast nonprofit with origins in the Peace Corps, which for decades supported local farmers, shepherds, and agricultural workers across the global South. IDEX has, in the past 6 years, been transformed into 2 distinct new things: the infrastructure back end to the Black Lives Matter organization in the United States, and also at the very same time, an investment fund vehicle driven by recruited MBAs and finance experts seeking to leverage decades of on-the-ground grantee relationships for novel forms of politically problematic lending instruments, and it did so with help from the family of one of the most famous American billionaires in history, the Oracle of Omaha himself. I should mention that Tides has been quite controversial in Canada for decades now, because the allegation has been made repeatedly that American left-wing money or American billionaire money is laundered through this organization in order to influence elections, campaigns in my country. So let's go on to tides. For a decade prior, 2013, donor revenue to IDEX, which changed its name to Thousand Currents, in 2016 remained in the modest six figures. But in 2013, it received an unprecedented $450,000 grant funding from a single source. That donor was Novo, a social justice foundation formed in 2006 by Peter Buffett, son of billionaire investor Warren Buffett, and Peter's wife, Jennifer. Thousand Currents did not respond to requests to address the relationship between their nonprofit administration and the business interests of their donors. But a worldly observer might notice synergies between IDEX's entrenched footprint across Latin America and Warren Buffett's interest in Liberty Latin America, the telecom operator that was rapidly expanding its services to hundreds of thousands of disadvantaged households across Chile, Panama, and the rest of the region, poorly served by existing telecommunications infrastructure. Buffett's interest in Liberty is a sizable proportion of the portfolio in Latin America held by Berkshire Hathaway, Buffett's holding company, whose shares are converted and gifted each year to his three children as unrestricted gifts to the respected foundations. As a nascent political project, the three co-founders of BLM, Garza, Tometi, and Colors, grew it from its origins in the summer of 2013 as a social media campaign into a national network with more than 30 chapters. Garza, in particular, became an increasingly visible presence who helped shape BLM into a powerful entity. In a role as the organization's most visible steward, she was guarded about the outside shaping forces that influenced BLM's formation and flexible in how it could exert its growing influence. Describing it in 2014 as an ideological and political intervention, Garza did not want BLM to succumb to the narrow nationalism that can be prevalent within some Black communities. Rather, as she wrote then, her co-founders were in the process of building a coalition centered on any identity which could ostensibly foreground a connection to Black lives, including Black queer and trans folks, disabled folks, Black undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all Black lives along the gender spectrum. They certainly like this word folks, don't they? I guess it seems more folksy than people. Those who might seek to support disabled folks and folks with records without concern of their skin color ran afoul of the movement's aim by perpetuating a level of white supremacist domination by reproducing a tired trope that we are all the same. Well, these people have gone out of, that's what intersectionality is all about. We are not all the same, that we have nothing in common whatsoever. And I can cite 4, 5, 6, 7 ways that I'm different from everyone, or at least the total of my differences makes me a superior person. These are deeply weird people, the people who founded BLM, and of course they made it clear at the beginning they meant to destroy the family as it was currently constituted. Their website has been, let's say, professionally redone. So I'm sure they still want to destroy the family, but now this gets hidden. Let's see, Thousand Currents voted unanimously to transfer the fiscal sponsorship of the BLM project to another California-based nonprofit known as the Tides Center, which along with the Tides Foundation exists underneath the control of the Tides Network, an umbrella organization which managed more than $591 million in revenue in 2018. In their statement to the Attorney General, Thousand Currents wrote that the transfer was in the best interests of all parties, citing BLM's growth and their need for greater support. I'm thinking about NGOs and charities generally. For the most part, NGOs are the enemy of humanity, and most charities are the enemy of humanity. And I really think that it would behoove a right-wing government, or the Trump government in the second administration, if he gets one, to just come down like a ton of bricks on charity generally. Because yes, there are charities which do very valuable work, But if you want to support a charity that actually does do valuable work, are you simply not going to donate to it because you're not going to get a tax receipt? These people use the law aggressively in order to hide the sources of their money and to hide exactly what is being done with their money. And it is not in the common interest, not at all. I came across. Let's go to the chat here. Hikmah Warrior says Hikmah means wisdom. Okay, well, I know that now. Jonathan Pohl says hi. Hello, Professor Pohl. Buffett is a highly regarded philanthropist. Yeah, that's one way to put it. When I read about these sweetheart deal that he got, and I'm trying to remember the company that it was. Perhaps someone can remind me. This was about a decade ago, where he was given a huge chunk of the ownership of this country while paying a fraction of what this company was worth. This is one of the most famous companies in America whose name escapes me. I consider him to be a fraud. Oh, I'm just like you. I like to sit on my porch in my rocking chair and enjoy a Coca-Cola. We all love Coca-Cola, right? I am in no way one of the most powerful men in the world who is constantly seeking to become richer and more powerful. Jonathan Pohl says all three-letter words are bad. NGO, CIA, FBI, KGB, NVD. Yeah. No. NGOs. Look, if Microsoft, if Bill Gates wants to pay for these organizations, let him pay for the organizations. See, these public-private partnerships, which I suppose is part of the central to third way, that wicked man, Tony Blair. These public-private partnerships are absolute poison. Absolute poison, because most of these NGOs are astroturfing. That's what they do. Oh, look at the public support for this cause. Oh, yeah, and the government is paying literally to whip up support for this cause, which happens to be its own cause. Okay. Buffett is leaving next to nothing to his children. Yeah, okay, that's what Bill Gates says too. I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when I see it. You see, with Frank Zappa's family, the dispute between some of the siblings and the others, you can tell when siblings have been cut out of a will because they howl. And they don't stop howling. And that's what we see amongst the Zappa children. So Peter Hitchens wrote this late last month, but I didn't see it a couple days ago. And it was one of those occasions, those very rare occasions, where I thought, I've been thinking exactly the same thing with the same examples for years. And here it is in print. And it was quite gratifying. The Beijing kowtow and the Mumbai Jumbai cringe, more on the strange renaming of cities. There's a considerable expansion and update of a posting I wrote some time ago about the strange, unexamined new habit of changing the names of major cities. I'm constantly baffled by the readiness of people, institutions, and newspapers to accept such renamings, especially as their origins are often quite nasty. I'd like to express gratitude to Mark Higgy for a fascinating article, Ducking Peking, which was published in The Spectator, Australia, 26th of September. In this, he resolved a question that has always nagged at my mind about the strange changeover from referring to the Chinese capital as Peking to referring to it as Beijing. I'm old enough to remember on atlases and globes, which were still used when I was in elementary school, it wasn't called Peking, it was called Peeping, or Peiping, Peiping. So it has changed, three times in my lifetime. Hitchens continues, I've always assumed that this was political in origin. I noticed it first being used in the early 1990s with a sort of smoothie diplomat who goes native at the drop of a kowtow. The claim that it was about correct pronunciation simply makes no sense. You only need to think about it to see that it is silly and wrong. I say only, though getting people to think about it is one of the hardest tasks in the world. We call many foreign capitals by English names which bear scant resemblance to what their inhabitants call them: Warsaw for Warszawa, Vienna for Wien, Prague for Praha, Dublin for, this is Bailey Athecleath, not to mention other major cities which are not capitals, such as Florence for Firenze and Munich for München. As for countries, who even tries? You may have been on holiday in Fratska, but did you even know it while you were there? Where is Barat? The point remains that foreign cities and countries have no business telling people in other countries how to refer to them. They can do what they like in their own sovereign territory, but not beyond it. And every excuse for the switch to Beijing crumbles when exposed to logic. The arguments used to justify its use in this country simply do not apply generally, nor would they work in reverse. The idea of the British ambassador in Paris telling the Quai d'Orsay that they must stop referring to Londres and henceforth call our capital London is utterly absurd. We would not try any such thing, and the French would laugh at us if we did. Likewise, the idea that the Foreign Office might call in the London correspondents of the Corriere della Sera, Le Monde, and Gazzetta Wyborcza and tell them that they must henceforth abandon Londra, Londres, and London and write only of London, or be denied cooperation, is equally ridiculous. Yet this is what the Chinese police state does, and there are still idiots who defend it or excuse it. Well, I was right about the overt political pressure, although it seems to have been aimed almost entirely at the Anglosphere, which China has been busy suborning and scaring for some time now with a great deal of success. They can obviously tell we're weak and pliable. It seems that the demand began to use Beijing in 1979, with the New York Times giving in 1986, The Guardian in 1988, and the BBC in 1990. The London Times held out until 1997, when his Peking correspondent was summoned to the foreign ministry and told that cooperation would be withdrawn if his newspaper did not adopt the Cowtown name of the PRC capital. This is entirely credible. When I was writing frequently about China in the early years of this century, I attracted the attention of the Chinese embassy in London, which became increasingly bossy and unpleasant. No other country about which I have written critically has ever done anything of the kind. Neither the continental European press nor Taiwan has adopted Beijing. Amusingly, Peking's main university is still called Peking University, and the code for its main airport remains PEK. Here are some further thoughts on our ridiculous cultural cringes over foreign names, largely stimulated by a contribution from Jeffrey Warner, who wrote, "There are problems in transcribing a foreign language into English, especially if the foreign language has no alphabet and is tonal. This is the case with Chinese. Unlike Hitchens, I don't see the use of the pinyin system of transcription instead of the way Giles is demeaning in any way. It is simply better. I recommend an article on the web entitled How Wade and Giles Did a Disservice to the English-Speaking World, which explains the matter in more detail." Okay. So, Mao Zedong in pinyin. Oh, it's pronounced Mao Zedong. Deng Xiaoping. Well, actually, it's pronounced Deng Xiaoping. Lang Lang, the famous classical pianist. Actually, it's pronounced Long Long. But the whole point of transliteration is such that, without the use of diacritics or ridiculously complicated systems of spelling, we know how the people in other countries with other languages say these words, say these names. And pinyin is absolutely useless for this. Hitchens agrees with me. He says, "I personally find pinyin ridiculous because of the way it expects the reader to know that letters such as Q and X are pronounced in a way quite unknown to any culture which uses the Roman alphabet. The man who was for years named in British newspapers as Lu Shao Qi is now Lu Shao Qi, or at least there's a Q involved. How is that a better guide to how his name is actually pronounced? And it does daft things like substituting the hissing, unpronounceable Xingiang for the easily pronounceable Xinjiang, friendly to an English tongue and eye. I'll just break in to say that you see a similar thing in the Ukraine, which I'll insist on calling it. Oh, that no. Now that we've broken out of Russia's orbit, it's not Kiev anymore. It's not? How does that work? Oh, it's still pronounced Kiev. Oh, okay, but it's spelled differently, and I'm going to have to remind myself of this. Is it Khiy? Something like that? See, everyone knew what the capital of the Ukraine was and how it was pronounced. Oh, no, but this is a superior transliteration. No, it isn't, because they don't use the Roman alphabet in the Ukraine, so it's entirely fatuous. It's just like China. We're going to make you jump through a little hoop. We're going to humiliate you here, because we're going to tell you that what you have known as Kiev is not Kiev anymore, and you're going to all have to step in line, because otherwise it means you're probably a tool of Vladimir Putin. Hitchens continues, I'd also like to point out that the Chinese language does not really exist in the way that the English language does. An example from real life, I traveled some years ago deep into the Canton countryside, which Pinyin would insist I call the Guangzhou countryside, to interview a woman who had had her house demolished by the Chinese Communist Party for daring to refuse an abortion and instead have a second child. This story itself may explain my hostility to any attempts to pander to the Chinese state. She spoke a Cantonese dialect. The mayor of the village translated this into standard Cantonese. The driver of our taxi hired in the city of Canton then translated this into Mandarin for the benefit of my own translator, who put it into English for me. And of course, the other way around. The interview, as you can imagine, took some time. So attempts by any English person to attempt an authentic Chinese pronunciation are pretty much absurd anyway. And the wide differences in the language spoken in different parts of planet China are one of the reasons why our names for Chinese cities are often so far from the pronunciations of them in modern official post-Mao Mandarin. And this, I suspect, is itself a very different language from pre-revolutionary Mandarin. In the same way, post-Soviet Russian is different. Even the alphabet was changed from pre-1917 Russian, and estuary English is different in shape, grammar, vocabulary, and intonation from the Oxford English, still unselfconsciously used by the upper crust in my childhood and early teens. But back to the main subject. There's no consistency in the great fashion for using authentic names for various countries and cities. The only thing these affectations have in common is a desire for self-abasement. For a start, they very seldom apply to the countries involved, as well as the cities. Why not? How many people who pretentiously call Bombay Mumbai, more on that later, or Calcutta Kolkata, call India Bharat? But that is in fact its name, if you believe that we should call foreign places what their inhabitants call them. Likewise, how many of those who insist on calling Peking Beijing and Nanking Nanjing refer to China by its actual name of Zhongguo? In my experience, none of them even knows that this is what the country calls itself. My favorite, of course, is, and I can't pronounce this, the official name for Dublin, which appears on the number plates of cars registered there. No British person uses it, and quite a lot of Irish people don't either. I'm sure London Liberals would use this name if they could only work out how to pronounce it, but it hasn't happened yet. They compensate by calling Londonderry Derry, and this choice is obviously undeniably political. For instance, as far as Irish name goes, if you look at the Irish name Patrick, as it's been anglicized, and then you look at how it is in Gaelic, it's spelled P-A-D-R-I-I-G, and I happen to know because I got told off, I got a flea in my ear for pronouncing it Porrick, and I was told with great hostility, as if I'd committed some terrible crime, that it's actually pronounced Porrick. Okay, all right. But back to Hitchens. Nearer to home, we simply don't do this at all. Nobody calls Paris Paris, and 70 years ago, English people familiar with France would have called Marseille Marseilles in writing and pronounced it Marseilles. Yes, I'm fairly sure that Lyon would have also been known as Lions and pronounced that way. In the 19th century, English people simply do not bother to use the French pronunciations for internationally famous French names. Livorno in Italy was Leghorn. In his History of England, written in the 19th century, or the 1800s, as we must now term it, Thomas Macaulay refers to Louis XIV as Louis. This is not because he was ignorant, but it was normal to anglicize French names at that time. I remember being impressed when I was in Paris myself, that they pronounce foreign names in their accents. For instance, the great avenues which come out as spokes in central Paris, the Avenue Franklin Roosevelt, Avenue Woodrow Wilson, etc., etc. I must say I admire them for that. So it is still, when most other countries are concerned, I know of nobody in Britain who speaks or writes of Sevilla, Wien, Roma, Den Haag, Copenhagen, or come to that Sverige or Suomi, let alone Fratska, Polska, Megiergorshag, or Ellis. Although there is a small society of pretentious persons who insist on calling Barcelona, Barcelona, like the BBC experts who call Afghanistan, yeah, I know you get that, and the Taliban, the Taliban. I used to get anguished queries from sub-editors about the right way to transcribe Russian words into English. There isn't one. Yes, exactly. There isn't one. The Cyrillic alphabet, currently with 32 letters, simply doesn't do a direct transliteration. Gorbachev or Gorbachev, who cares? Yuri with a Y, Yuri with an IY, or Yuri just R-U-R-Y, what does it matter? The same is even more true of Arabic and Farsi. Assad with one S or two, Osama or Usama, Tehran or Tehran. Frankly, who needs to know? Now, I started reading Russian novels in the 1960s. I sort of fell into this trap that the Nobel Prize-winning author of 1970, this is Alexander Solzhenitsyn. But then we were instructed, and it was on the cover of the book, that his name was Aleksandr, when this is simply not necessary. And that, strangely, though, we still call him Leo Tolstoy and not Lev Tolstoy. But it's all very arbitrary. Russians don't say St. Petersburg. They say roughly Sankt Peterburg, and will often refer to the city simply as Peter. When it was called Leningrad, my Russian teacher who came from there despaired of teaching me how to pronounce the Lenin part as a Russian would speak it. Half-educated people think that Moscow is known in Russia as Moskva, but it isn't. It is pronounced to sound much more like Moskva, with the emphasis heavily on the VA, because that is in Russian. Unstressed O's are pronounced as A. But yeah, I think it's time to, I agree with Hitchens, it's time to put an end to this. Again, we are not supposed to, it's ridiculous. Oh, you can't call this by that anymore. When we do, with great regularity, when it comes to all of these other cities, it just seems to me to be entirely pretentious. And again, in what way is calling Bombay insulting to the Indians? I suspect that in many cases it just means that people will give up any interest. Because if you're expected to learn things that are difficult and then told with regularity, no, that's not proper, they'll just stop paying attention. I'll tell you a story about the fellow I used to work with. And his last name was Barris, Barris. And I'd worked with him for, I don't know, about a year. I knew him pretty well. And I asked him if he were Jewish. And he said, no, why do you ask? And I said, well, Barris is it's a common Jewish name. Also, you're a smart guy who's funny. So, I thought with the name being Barris, that you'd be Jewish. And he said, no, it's Ukrainian. And I said, Ukrainian? Tell me more. And he said that for the first 18 years of his life, his surname had been Barass. That's how it had been transliterated from the Ukrainian. And after being shouted out as bare ass, roughly 10,000 times, he determined that on his 18th birthday, he would go down to the registry office and change the name, which is what he did. And I realized at the time this is a very common Ukrainian name, which is typically transliterated as Barash, but sadly not in his case. Let's have a final look at the chat. Okay. Yaiko Rapala says it was Petrograd only for some years, Russian version of freedom fries. The Berg ending is German, Grad is Slavic. And when Germany they did a lot of silly distancing from German things. KMG doesn't pronounce Jagmeet Singh properly. Yes, apparently we're supposed to pronounce, it's spelt Jagmeet, which is silly enough, but it's apparently pronounced Jagmeet. I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to do that. He used to go by the name Jimmy, which is a name that all Canadians know. But he used to call himself Jimmy Dalawal. Now Dalawal is a very popular Sikh name. Singh is a generic name. It means lion. All Sikhs must have Singh in their name. But he decided to go with Jagmeet Singh just to let everyone know just how Sikh he was, and just not how Canadian he is. But it's absolutely infuriating. Obama and Mount McKinley come to mind. Yes, it has some sort of Indian name now. This is from Emmett Kelly's Earth. The Bombay Bicycle Club. And I don't know why that came to mind. It was a nightclub. Actually, it was a neighborhood pub on West 4th in the Kitsilano district of Vancouver. Perhaps they've changed the name. Perhaps it's considered insulting. D.B. Cooper says, remember how Obama would always go out of his name to pronounce place names in the new approved way, almost to pretend that he spoke the languages. It was so obnoxious. Guatemala, Cartagena. Yes, I remember this with, there was Rhodesia, right? And then it became Zimbabwe. No, and then it became Zimbabwe, and then it became Zimbabwe, like that, right? Nicaragua became Nicaragua, and then Nicaragua, like that. It's just increasingly ridiculous. YT says, I'll call him Lev, Tolstoy, presumably, because Lev is not Leo. Yeah, I just, again, I saw this in, with the Penguin books. I guess they really got into this in the 1970s, that they were going to use transliterations, which were obviously not English forms. And again, the whole, when Tolstoy died in 1910, he was one of the most famous men in the world. And we knew him at the time as Leo Tolstoy. But no, everything is wrong. It's actually Lev Tolstoy. And of course, it's probably Lev, like that, Russian is difficult to pronounce for native English speakers. Very difficult to pronounce. Let's see. Yaiko Rapala is saying Finns mostly have just called that city Pitari throughout the renamings. But of course, it's actually the city of Nevanlinna. It's just had a slight case of Russian occupation for 300 years. No, I've been told, that I'm not saying Barack Obama's name correctly. As far as I'm concerned, rhymes with Alabama. And now Kamala Harris. Look, I'm not going to jump through hoops for people who claim they're Canadian or American, but whose parents have chosen names which are defiantly not so, and have not taken the opportunity to Canadianize or Americanize them. It just seems to me to be hostile and divisive. But that is not my way, hostile and divisive. I'm going to be talking on the book club about Archie and Mahitapal on Friday. And Mehetabel is a cat, a much put upon cat, which claims to be reincarnated through the Pythagorean transmigration of souls from Cleopatra. And this cat has a motto, which is jamais triste, toujours gai. And I've decided that that is going to be my new motto. I'm just talking about the third Bill and Ted movie, Face the Music, on theater Thursday. That's the show for tonight. And if you liked it, any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you clicked on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. Of course, I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to donate to this live stream, which would be exceedingly well appreciated at this particular time in my life, my PayPal account is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can send me a donation directly through Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. Let's say a final comment here from Professor Paul. My daughter is called Mary because my wife hated all Kyrgyz girl names and wanted the most Anglo name possible. So I will leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and viewers, all manage to find some kind of genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.